welcome back to another moment in time with yours truly. Today's book is The Woman in the Photo by Mary Hogan. First letdown was that this was not a ghost story. That was my fault though. That has no reflection upon the author or the novel. It had been on my TBR for so long that I had forgotten what it was about, and the cover looked like a ghost book, a ghost story. So I just want a good ghost story. So if you guys know of any good ghost stories, please send them my way. Since it wasn't a ghost story, it's actually a historical fiction, and it revolves around the Johnstown flooding. So back in the late 1800s in Pennsylvania, there was this very prestigious hunting and fishing club where all the elite would go to summer, and their vanity led them to, the club was basically up on a mountain of sorts, and the town was below, and these very wealthy people created a lake and they dammed it up. Eventually, a very hard rainfall caused this dam to explode, flooding the town below and killing thousands. On that note, my problem is that I was so disconnected from the narrator and the story by the time that this tragedy happened. It failed to hit me. It failed to have any sort of impact on me. And I thought it was a little messy. I thought that there was so much lead up to the event that when the event actually happened, there wasn't enough time to explore the event. That said, let's get into what happens. Some of my problem is that I did listen to it on audiobook, and I don't always give it my fullest attention. And because I can't visually see certain things, I'm going to miss. So in this novel, we have two perspectives in two different timelines. The first is Lee, or Elizabeth. She is an adoptee. She has just turned 18, and because she is 18, she will now have access to certain medical, biological information from her closed adoption. Oh my gosh, can I just say what a big letdown that was? And maybe if you know more about the adoption and the closed adoption process, this will mean more to you. But when she is 17, she receives a letter saying there is new biological information about you that we cannot inform you about until your 18th birthday. That could very well be because, as a closed adoption, she has to be 18 to get this information. However, they make it sound so important, and it turns out that her biological family, like her maternal side, has roots in Judaism, and this Jewish tribe that she hails from, women have shown signs of being extra susceptible to certain cancers. This is where my issue came in, because wouldn't information like that be something that you would need to know before you're 18? It's not, oh, your mother's middle name was Jean, or you have a half brother or something. Like, this is something that could potentially affect you and you would want to get tested for. And you have this entire year where you could have taken precautionary measures, but you had to wait. So I understand that this is what is supposed to be propelling things forward. Like this idea that Lee is just so ready to be 18 so she can learn what this information is about her. But I thought it could have been something different, especially because once Lee learns this, she becomes she is, over the course of her life, in my opinion, becomes slightly more obsessed with her biological family, like where she comes from, which is natural. But once she learns of her Jewish roots, she does start to look into things. But my problem is that the Jewish heritage played very, very little into this novel. So to make this a central point and then to do nothing with it was disappointing to me. The only other time it was mentioned was in the past timeline. Her ancestor, a girl named Elizabeth, her mother is Jewish, and she had married her father, and she did observe whatever religion he had, basically saying, okay, I'll go to church like once a week or something, but she still made it a point to observe her own Jewish heritage. That was all we got. We got a paragraph worth of information on how Judaism played into their family lineage. And I thought that was a huge miss. They could have done so much more with that. But back to the plot. We have Lee/Elizabeth in the present time, and in the past we have Elizabeth, who is from a wealthy family in the late 1800s. Her family hails from Pittsburgh, but just like all the other wealthy, they summer at the South Fork Hunting and Fishing Club. We open up with her and her mother and her brother on their way. Their father, or her father, is a doctor. Although, and while they're wealthy, it's like a caveat wealth, because he isn't like the wealthiest person, but he is the doctor to the wealthy, which makes him wealthy. Anyways, I don't know if we really needed that, because it doesn't play into anything whatsoever. Nobody looks down on her because of her lack of wealth or status. Although, back to the Jewish thing, okay, I'm just gonna say it because I'll probably forget it later. There is a love interest. Like, she has two love interests during her time period. One of them is her expected love interest. He is the guy that she should marry because he can boost the family's status. And his name is James Tottinger. He is British, and his relation is grandmother to Queen Victoria. For some reason, his family is coming to this resort for the summer, and it's the ambition of every female there to snag him. He, in the end, I just have so many issues with Elizabeth and everything in line with her story, but in the end, he had begun pursuing her, only for his correspondence to taper off. And then she learns that it's because he learned that her mother is Jewish, and so she has Jewish roots. Why any of this really matters? Because her heritage had no bearing on anything whatsoever, and it felt like a total cop-out from Hogan to just be like, okay, it's a love triangle, and this is the way I'm gonna get rid of one of our sides. She and her mother and her little brother Henry are off to the Hunt and Fishing Club. It is the summer of 1889, Memorial Day, which is important because that's when the flood happens. We see that she has this fraught relationship with her mother, and the dust jacket, the summary, tells us that she is basically this free thinker. And that is why she doesn't get along with her mother, because her mother can't understand why she doesn't just fall in line. And then I had issues with the mother because her mother didn't come from wealth. I think her mother's father was a tailor, and this is how the parents met. He would make Elizabeth's father's suits, and her mother was just so beautiful that this was the person that her father chose. And so I couldn't figure out if the mother behaved the way she behaved because she was trying to prove herself, or if she truly thought that she was that much better than everybody else. So I would have liked a little bit more characterization surrounding the mother. I could see her overcompensating for her roots because she felt like she needed to meet a standard, that she needed to be above reproach, that she needed to fall in line with everybody else of their station because everybody else came from old money and they knew that she came from humble means. It would have been so much more impactful if I just had a little bit of that. Like, if we'd somehow seen her mother's insecurities, or maybe her mother's concerns for her because she wants to raise her daughter up. She wants to elevate their status. And so maybe at some point she confides in her daughter the importance of her marrying James Tottinger, rather than just like, oh, well, you need to marry James Tottinger because of this. Like, Anyways, we get a lot of tension, which is great. I thought the novel started out well, although we actually physically start with Lee. And I saw problems right away because Hogan has a tendency to head hop. And so we open with Lee waking up on her birthday, and she's obviously in a physical location that is less than savory. And then all of a sudden we're in her mother's head. And then all of a sudden we're back with her. So that makes listening to an audiobook that much harder when you can't figure out who's talking. Anyways, when we get to Elizabeth, this is where I first started to engage. Similarly to her mother, I didn't quite over the course of the novel understand the need for her brother. It was set up very nicely where you see that her mom prefers the brother. We don't know why. There's a large age gap. Elizabeth is 18, Henry is 6. You see this idea of he has no idea the limitations that are going to put on him when he's older, but for now he's just this sweet kid who does everything that our mother asks, and he is her favorite. I would have liked to have seen more Henry. I would have liked more reasoning for her to have a brother. It really felt like we needed almost an antagonist to her in this beginning chapter to see why she doesn't get along with her mother. And I kept thinking throughout this novel, Elizabeth wasn't a forward thinker. Elizabeth was just like every other woman of her age, of her day. And it was like Hogan would forget that. And then all of a sudden she's like, oh, that's right, I gotta make Elizabeth a progressive woman. But she felt entirely judgmental this entire book. Very conceited, self-consumed, too worried about what other people think and what she would be doing or should be doing. And I kept comparing it to Siri Mitchell's She Walks in Beauty, which has been a favorite of mine. The last time I read it and did a review on it, I didn't love it as much. But that character is sort of what I was expecting, because she doesn't want to live the way that society expects her to live, but she understands that she has to. So she does what she can to fit in, but her true nature really makes it hard for her to do so. And that was what I was expecting from Elizabeth. I was expecting somebody who wanted freedom, who wanted what her brother had, but was boxed into the stigma of what a woman should have been at that time. We get one instance where they're still wearing corsets, and a friend of hers had come back from Paris and brought her bloomers. So she spends the afternoon in bloomers. I mean, okay. I know I'm being cynical right now, and I'm sure this was hugely scandalous back then, but we get bloomers. That was really the only thing that stood out to me. The other things that Hogan tried to do were really, we're in a situation, conversation is happening, and then, oh, all of a sudden, Elizabeth disagrees. Okay, here's a good example. The other love interest, the true love interest, which is where I really got thrown off in the first place, but I'll get there in a minute. This guy named Eugene Eggers. Eugene Egger. He's a local boy. When things fall apart with James Tottinger, which I'll get to that too, do not worry. Something happens. The Tottingers are like, we're out of here. Everybody's upset with Elizabeth. And so she convinces her maid to go down to town with her because she has this big plan. I was expecting something to do with the Tottingers, and it had nothing to do with the Tottingers. It had everything to do with this guy named Eugene Egger. She's trying to find where he lives. They get there, and they're sitting down having tea with his family, and she's all of a sudden like realizing how privileged she is in comparison to all of these people, and how she needs to be more realistic in seeing things for how they really are. And I was just like, wait a minute, where is this coming from? I think it started with her hat, because she realized she was the only one who was still wearing a hat. You still sound incredibly superficial. This is coming out of absolutely nowhere, and Where should we start? Should we stay with Elizabeth or should we go back to Lee? I feel like Elizabeth was the more interesting of the two storylines, so I'll just hit Lee because hers is quicker. Like, Elizabeth consumed more of the novel. We have Lee, it's her birthday, she can finally have access to this information, but what we learn about her is that her plan, like, she'd have this nuclear family, and she was on the track to go to Columbia. She'd been accepted to Columbia and there were no issues, only for one day she got home and her parents were like, you have no money. This college fund that we'd had set up for you is completely bankrupt because basically like this Ponzi scheme, now we have no money. The father, I guess he'd already had a drinking problem. As I said, there's a good bit of head hopping. At one point, we are in Valerie, the mother's head, and she notes how there had been a drinking issue before all of this, which makes things worse in the aftermath. But he leaves the family. There's a brother named Scott who, again, just like Henry, had no purpose whatsoever. He is, I think, their biological son. Again, there's a huge age gap, like a 12-year age gap. And so he's off doing what he's doing, like living in a yurt in Iowa or something. We never, ever hear from him or see him. We do wonder about him because Lee is like, oh, I wonder how he's doing. Does he even know that we have no money? And apparently he is pretty self-centered himself. Like, he never has any contact with his family whatsoever. He was completely pointless. She has this daydream about what her 18th birthday should have been, where she comes down for breakfast and there's pancakes and eggs and the whole family's there and Scott's teasing her and they're having this good old time. So I would have accepted that he'd been around and then things fell apart and he was like, I can't handle this, I'm out of here. It's really that dissolution of her family unit. Nothing. There's no point in her having a brother. So the brother's out of the picture, the dad's out of the picture, and what her mother has done is become a maid of sorts. There's another family called the Adeles, and they were super wealthy, super posh. The husband had been roommates with the guy who was, running this Ponzi scheme. They had been giving him all their extra money only for him to lose their money as well, and now they're poor, but they can pretend to be rich because of various methods and ways, but they're broke. But what they do to kind of keep up appearances is they hire Valerie and they let her live in their pool house. Valerie is able to finagle Lee into the deal, but there's all of these rules. Like, you can't swim in the pool, you can't let people know that you live here, you can't even park here, you have to park down the road. Okay, I do get it. If you are that self-consumed and you have that much pride, you're not gonna want people to know what has really happened to you. But the way that they treat Valerie and Lee, the word ridiculous kept popping into my head. It's more on the side of Hogan's writing, where there's just a lot of stereotypes in this novel. That is why Lee wakes up in these accommodations that are less than satisfactory, and she just kind of hates her life. She has a job at Bed Bath & Beyond that she can't stand, but her mother, on the day that they're gonna go learn what this information is, her mother is running late and they barely make it. And yet again, we have another stereotype of this receptionist who's like, I care more about myself than you, and even though we're not actually closed, I'm gonna tell you we're closed, I'm not gonna let you in, only for this benevolent employee to be like, come on, like, my ride's late, you're fine. She then reveals that there's a genetic mutation that runs through this Jewish line and something, and in the end, Lee meets her biological family. Her aunt is like, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. They're like, that's nothing. And I was like, again, this was such a huge issue, only for it to be a non-issue. This then, while they're getting this information, the woman hands over, she's like, oh, actually, and I've got this photo in your file. And she hands it over, and it is of Elizabeth, or unknown ancestor, standing next to Clara Barton, who is the founder of the Red Cross. Hold on. Yes, Clara Barton. This is Lee's first clue as to who she is. My issue here is then the woman just takes the photo back, and Lee has nothing to go off of except for her memory. She tracks down some leads, she does some Googling, and she learns Clara Barton. And so that is then where she goes to figure out kind of when this picture would be taken. And that is how she figures out why these women are standing in a pile of rubble. Eventually, she figures out who Elizabeth is. I thought this was kind of ridiculous because, as I've said, her birth name was Elizabeth. Her shock and awe over the fact that her ancestor's name was Elizabeth, I was like, what do you expect? It's a familial name. If her name had been Lee, then I would have been shocked. But you were basically named after your ancestor. Why is that so crazy? During all of this, she comes home one day and she's like, you know what? I'm gonna take a shower. But man, I could really take in a dip in the pool. Then she goes skinny dipping in the pool. I thought it was completely out of character. So she's swimming and she's playing Marco Polo with herself. Like, this whole scene was just something else. Only for then a male voice to be like, oh, Polo. And I'm like, oh, there it is. Now she's caught and they're getting kicked out. Turns out this guy named George, or York because he's from New York, is visiting a neighbor down the way, and the neighbor had thrown George's tennis racket into the woods, and so now George is trying to find it. If you could please explain to me, I think the neighbor lives up the hill, and he's probably a couple houses down. How in the world did that racket get thrown into the woods behind the Adele's house? There's just things that don't make sense to me. He invites Lee, who has decided to go by the name Elizabeth because she's so connected to her biological family. Like, I thought just things were moving a little too fast. Anyways, like, without logic, without development, but she's like, okay, sure, because she's pretending that this is her house. So she gets up there and she's intimidated, and apparently she comes and goes a couple times, but we have since switched over to Elizabeth, so we don't actually see all that. When she finally enters the party and he's like, oh, yeah, I saw you coming and going. They have a great time. They kiss. He gets her number, and then he's basically back to New York because that's where he goes to school. That's where he's from. That's where he goes to school. She has no intention of ever pursuing anything with him, which goes nowhere. He will not leave her alone, and so she finally caves and they start dating. They travel to Pennsylvania to meet her family, and then we meet the grandfather, where eventually it is explained that his crankiness is more towards his disdain for what happened with his daughter. Because this whole entire novel, we knew that the mother drowned. The biological mother had drowned. And so my question then was, if you drowned, how did you have everything for the adoption already set up? So it took till the end of the novel to learn that she killed herself because she suffered from depression or just some kind of mental illness. She had intended to also kill Lee, but decided not to. And she had everything set up for after her death, which it still doesn't make sense to me. The father wasn't happy that she got pregnant. The father wasn't happy, I guess, that she kept the baby. The father wasn't happy with the way that things were turning out. And so he's now also taking it out on Lee, because whenever he sees Lee, all he sees is Lee's mother. Again, stereotypes and cop-outs. And this is one thing I just don't get. Because most of the book focuses on Elizabeth's perspective, we don't get a lot of Lee and kind of her search for herself, her quest for her biological family and who she is in that. As much as I liked York, I think having that subplot took away the time that could have been given to Lee in finding herself, because all of a sudden she wants to be Elizabeth and all she wants is her biological family until she actually meets her biological family and then she rejects them. It's awkward. I guess her biological mother's intention in leaving that photo was for her to have somebody to connect with, and she's like, yes, I don't connect with my biological mother, I don't connect with my biological aunt or my grandfather, but I definitely connect with this woman in the photo. So she has this awkward meal with them, and all she wants to do is go home, and her aunt is so nice. I liked her aunt. You could tell that her aunt really wished that they had been part of each other's lives. And she tries to give her a family heirloom that hailed from Elizabeth. And she's like, no, I won't take it. And she's like, well, if you won't take that, well, then at least take this. And she hands her a letter that Elizabeth had written to her first child. And this is just something that everybody in the family always gave to their children to read. And I was just like, she's trying so hard. And you're the one who went after her. So why are you now all of a sudden like not interested whatsoever? It didn't make sense to me, only because there was no time for it. We start with this burning desire to get to know her family, to almost disassociate from her adoptive family, only for then all of a sudden she doesn't want to be part of her biological family. She wants to be Lee again. That's how that ends, and she finally comes clean with York because she had misled him this whole time. She told him her name was Elizabeth. She let him think that she was rich, and he was like, I don't care. Anything you can do, I can do better. You have something to be honest about, well, I have something to be honest about. And that's what I liked about him. But again, I thought the time spent on him could have been spent elsewhere. I do think it was good for Lee to see she shouldn't be ashamed of who she is. I don't know. There's a lot about Lee I didn't understand. I understand that she couldn't go to Columbia because she didn't know she didn't have any money until after it was too late to apply for financial aid. But it's like she completely gave up on this dream she had and is wallowing at Bed Bath & Beyond. It's like she just gave up all of her dreams, but that's not the kind of person she seemed to have been in the beginning. I know it's not fun to be in debt. You're just gonna give everything up because this bad thing happened? Like, make something of yourself. That's how you were set up to be. That's how Elizabeth is set up to be. And if you're supposed to be an archetype of Elizabeth, then why aren't you doing anything? Now we get to Elizabeth. Okay, back to the beginning with her. She's on her way to the Hunt and Fishing Club. They get off the train and she runs into Eugene Egger. And obviously she already knows him and she's pleased to see him. She introduces him to her mother, knowing how her mother is going to react, and her mother does exactly as expected, realizing this guy's a townie, and snubs him. They head off to their cottage, which is nothing to turn your nose up at. Nothing really happens. They get there, whatever. Chapter ends, we hit Lee, and then we come back to Elizabeth. And if I had been reading the book, I wouldn't have missed it. But as I was listening to it, I completely missed it. We travel back a summer. And this, I think, was the biggest flaw in the plot, because we are set up to believe that Elizabeth is a forward-thinking woman and that she is somehow going to be involved in hopefully preventing the destruction of Johnstown. This is the summer of the event. I was expecting we are gonna see her evolving over this summer from an empty-headed Gilded Age debutante to somebody of substance. But most of the novel is spent in the summer before, where she acts like anybody else would act. Like she judges all these other girls, and then her, like these are also supposed to be her friends. These men, these women, they're all supposed to be her friends, but all she does is judge them and speak ill of them. And then she's like, oh, that James Tottinger, he's like really attractive, but I don't like his personality. Yet I'm gonna do everything I can to one up everybody else. It didn't make sense to me. We start off in the summer of 1889, and then we backtrack to the summer of 1888, which is when she meets James Tottinger, and she makes a fool of herself because this is the afternoon. She decides to just hang out in her bloomers, but curiosity gets the best of her, so she goes down to sneak a peek at him, only to get caught. And she's in the woods, she's all muddy, making a fool of herself. Her grand plan to redeem herself is to overdress for tea time so that everybody can see her, and it works. And her mother comes back. She thinks her mom's gonna be mad at her because initially she thought her mom was gonna be mad at her because it was gonna get back to her mother that she'd made a fool of herself. And now she's thinking, oh, basically she's doubly mad because I did something kind of foolish. But her mother's like, oh my gosh, you're such a genius. Why is she such a genius? What did she do except get overdressed to walk into the clubhouse, just to walk right back out of the clubhouse? I don't know. The understanding is the rest of the summer is about her reeling James Tottinger in. Although she doesn't really give him the time of day. They have zero interactions, but he has a little sister named Ivy. And Ivy's like 14. I guess the girl's never seen the light of day. Again, I didn't understand it. And this is when I caught on to the fact that we were in a different summer, because I think the initial suggestion, the initial intent was for them to play croquet. And then Ivy wanted to get in the boat. Somehow the plan then morphed into picnicking on this little island in the middle of the lake. Elizabeth overestimates her ability to row the boat. They finally make it to the little island, and they're struggling. Like, they are about to tip over, only to be saved by this local boy. Turns out to be Eugene Egger. I'm like, didn't we already meet him? How can we meet him again? They get back to the other side of shore. It's like search and rescue party trying to find them. The Tottingers, like, apparently the fact that Ivy went out in a boat and didn't wear a hat is the mortal sin. The Tottingers are so affronted that they leave. Like, they're on their way back to England, where I'm like, what? Because Ivy didn't wear a bonnet? And this is the point where Elizabeth has this great idea to go down and see Eugene. And I don't know. I really don't know what the point of her plan was. Like, she never asked him for anything. She's supposed to redeem herself somehow. So how does this redeem her? By lying to her mother about where she's going, just to go to town and have tea with Eugene's family unannounced. But before they go, James Tottinger, who has only had one conversation with her as far as this book is concerned, hands her a note. And the note is, I need to see you as soon as possible. And that's it. Like, we are done until we pick up a year later and they've been chit-chatting. She's still ambivalent about him. I do not understand. This was not built up. There was no explanation as to how they reconnected, only that they've been exchanging letters and she is trying to play hard to get. And he is supposed to escort her to her debutante ball, and then he all of a sudden stops communicating with her. After the Tottingers left, then Elizabeth's family was like, we're getting out of here too. We're so ashamed. We've got to leave. She spends the rest of the summer at her father's doctor's office. So now we are back at the lake, and this is the summer of the disaster, and it is just pouring cats and dogs. Elizabeth is so worried about the lake. At what point did this lake become important to you? There were moments throughout her point of view where there was made mention of the instability of the lake, of how the rich are not thoughtful of the impact of this lake on the ecosystem, on the people below, and how they hoard this lake to themselves and how bad things can happen. So Hogan tries to drop breadcrumbs, but this book is not about this dam breaking and the lake flooding the town below. It's absolutely not. On one hand, we have one girl trying to figure out who she is, and on the other hand, we have a girl flitting about trying to woo a guy that she doesn't even like. No character development whatsoever. But now we're back at the lake and she is all concerned. The dam does break. She is trying to, I guess, get down to the town to warn people, and she's too late. Thousands of people die. I'm like, this really could have been something big. And then additionally, at some point when Lee is doing her research into Claire Barton, we stop having Lee perspectives and we start learning about Claire Barton. But again, the whole Red Cross thing, it could have been more impactful if the story had gone in a different direction. As it was, it just took up space that could have gone somewhere else. Elizabeth is too late to warn anybody. Now she and Eugene are basically on a rescue mission to find and rescue anybody they can. And Hogan really tries to depict the devastation, but because I was so disconnected from Elizabeth and from the story, like I was so bored by this point that it failed to have an impact on me. And it's just, that's really upsetting because this could have been something big. Like this was the whole reason of the novel. And then they team up with Claire Barton because none of the rich folks send help. They don't give money, they don't give clothing, they don't give any kind of supplies. But Claire Barton comes with her first aid. They set up camp and they get the town through it. And Elizabeth, her parents keep saying, yep, you know, are you okay? Like, we're waiting for you. And since she never comes back, they disown her. She marries Eugene and then they live happily ever after. And that's that. It was very predictable. It lacked substance. It lacked characterization, engagement, and I want my money back. I want my money back ×2. Can Apple do that for me? Can they please just give me refunds? Because I'm never gonna read this book. Never, ever, 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 ever. There are a lot of characters and a lot of subplots, and I just didn't understand what the point was. There we go. I'm sure there are so many things I forgot to talk about, but this feels like a very long review, and it's taken me forever to sit down and do. If you have questions, let me know. Like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. Bye.